Hello and welcome. I'm going to share my screen, if that's okay. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Okay. Well, good morning and thank you so much for having me as a presenter today. I'm going to briefly share some research I conducted at an HBCU in a southern state, and it's on major depression among college women. And just to give you a little bit about myself, I am an assistant professor of social work at Austin Peay State University, a proud two-time HBCU graduate. I attended Tougaloo College in Mississippi and Clark Atlanta University in Atlanta, Georgia, and finished my PhD at the University of Alabama. And what I want to really uplift in my presentation is the importance of mental health among our Black college women. And it's important because we are presently in a pandemic and dealing with so many issues. And those issues don't just, stop when it comes to adulthood. They also impact our young adults. So I want to take you back a little bit and look at how we really started to get into conversations around Black mental health. It's been existing for many, many years, but it wasn't until 1999 when our Surgeon General David Satcher issued the first report on mental health. And really, he contextualized it and really put a definition to the word mental illness and the word mental health and made those clear distinctions. So mental illness refers collectively to all diagnosable illnesses. So anything you can diagnose, like depression, like schizophrenia, any of those issues, they will fall under the umbrella of mental illness. And when we start talking about mental health disorders, those are specific things that can be diagnosed. When we think about mental health, we're really talking about our well-being, mental wellness, emotional health, mental capacity. And so major depression was important for me to look at because I am a woman who lived with a grandmother who had a serious mental illness. I come from the Mississippi Delta, from a tradition of caregiving, and my mother's mother, my maternal grandmother, lived with paranoid schizophrenia. And so we were privileged in the sense that we always had access to psychiatrists. We had access to what we needed, but my grandmother lived with me for many, many years of my life. There was a shared caregiving experience among my family members. My mom is one of 11. And so looking at mental health was always something that was really important to me. I was cognizant of it at a very early age. And I remember being 9 and 10 with my whole family, us visiting our grandmother and being a part of her experience. So major depression can be classified as disturbances in sleep, mood. It affects our behavior, physical, and mental health. And some of those symptoms, I won't go into too much detail: agitation, loss of interest, headaches, digestive issues. So some of those issues can actually be psychosomatic. And so the literature review finds that Blacks or African Americans are less likely to seek out treatment when they are dealing with feelings of depression due to the cultural stigma associated with depression. In general, people from communities of color have a generalized distrust of the mental health professionals, but also of the healthcare system. And we know we've heard about those infamous studies or experiments that have been conducted on Blacks and folks from communities of colors, where those that have created a tension between people from communities of color and the traditional white medical profession. Language barriers also impede treatment process. When people are going to seek out treatment, they may not use a standard language to say, I'm depressed. They may say, I have the blues, or classified in a different way. And so sometimes, particularly as it relates to Black women in society, there's a need to shift. And so that constant shifting between who am I in one area and who am I in my actual life causes this mental distress. And we see this as a factor that influences depression. Some of the literature review out there from Baldwin, who is a Black psychologist, suggests that an anti-African thrust leads to issues around suicidality. Naeem Akbar suggested that an alien self-concept, when we are wrestling against our true identity as Black folks or as Africans or whatever your cultural identity may be, when you are wrestling against that, that creates a sense of neurosis. And so as it relates to Black women, they're constantly dealing with daily assaults. And this doesn't mean that others are not, that Black men or African men are the others, but I'm specifically talking about Black women. They're dealing with daily assaults to their self-esteem. We know issues like colorism are pervasive, body image issues, the constant constant notion that Black women need to be something other than who they are. Issues even around hair and texture. So those are issues that Black women are constantly dealing with. Also, the notion of the strong Black woman syndrome is something that definitely is pervasive in the Black community, where many Black women feel the need to appease others and to take on the weight of the world. And so those are some of the issues. Why is this issue significant? As we think about depression among Black women, about 16% of Black people have reported having a mental health issue, and these are current statistics. 22% of those within the last year have reported a serious mental illness, and the Black community has faced historic adversity such as racism, the legacy of slavery, and we are still dealing with issues right now. When we look at the George Floyd, we look at Breonna Taylor, we are still dealing with these issues on a day-to-day basis, and even at those of us who are in academia, we still face these onslaughts or these attacks on our character, on our intelligence, even as we work in the space of academia. And so when we look at Black women, they are likelier to deal with severe depression. They are often the most undertreated group of women for depression. So let's look at our Black college students or Black college students in general. And I won't go over all of these, but 50% of Black students report that they've never received any mental health education. I probably would be the same way had I not had that experience of being around a family where we were involved with psychiatrists because of my grandmother's serious mental illness. Now, she lived a great life. She died at 97, but we had access to what we needed. Everyone cannot say that same thing. Black students also feel depressed. 75% of Black college students report they tend to keep their feelings to themselves. 40% experience mental health issues. They're less likely to have insurance and are less likely to seek out treatment. 9.2% of our Black college students are experiencing suicide, and 1.7 or almost 2% have experienced an attempt. And so this is a serious issue. And so what are some of the other issues that are pervasive among our Black college students? I like to think about my own experience when I was in college, and I found that my friends and I were dealing with relationship issues, trying to graduate on time, trying to figure out what the next steps were for us. But Black students tend to work themselves to the point of extreme illness, often to escape the threat of feeling inferior. And so here to my right, you have these beautiful HBCU queens. This is actually at my college, Tougaloo College. But what's beneath the surface of all of this beauty? What are we dealing with? Some mental health issues. Also, Black students, particularly those at HBCUs, are faced with the constant assaults about their degrees and where they earn their degrees from. If you see here, I have some Twitter posts, and there are many, many myths that suggest that HBCUs are inferior to predominantly white institutions. And we know that's simply just not true. There are many myths that PWIs are more rigorous, that the scholarship is there coming from there is more intelligent, that you will have a better cultural or academic experience, that there are better resources. And some of the myths around HBCUs, they are inferior schools, easy to enter, limited resources. And so these things are negative, and that's put out there in society, and it makes our Black college students feel that they have to, justify or really shore up or they put so much pressure on them to be excellent when they are already excellent, and the schools in which they attend are already excellent. Okay, all of my family members are HBCU graduates, and I also worked at an HBCU before Alcorn State University. And so then we start dealing with women dealing with this notion of the strong Black woman syndrome. And I thought this picture was a great representative of that, where you're required to be a mother, a partner, a caregiver. I'm a caregiver, an activist, a scholar. Black excellence, that's great, but it puts a lot of pressure on us. Educators, the first of many. We look at Ketanji Brown Jackson. She is the first, but think about the immense pressure she had to undergo for many, many years just to become the first. What has that done to her psychologically? What does that do to her health? And the idea that failure is not an option. Why? Because if Black women fail, it impacts the rest of our community. Also, there's the notion of the Sojourner Syndrome. We know that Sojourner Truth was an abolitionist who freed the slaves. But what it suggests is that women take on so much and trying to, just take care of so many other people that it has an impact on their health. And, we just become and function in survival mode. Other ideas or ideologies that are out there include John Henryism, and this often applies to Black men or Black folks in general, where there's you have to kill yourself to be successful. And we know that's not true. But is it pervasive among our Black college students? And the notion of grit. We all know that you just got to dig deeper, dig down, and be gritty to get what you want. And it is important to have a level of resilience, but we often don't look at the mental health implications that come along with just being in a constant state of persevering, a constant state of fighting for our rightful place in society. And so the research question I asked on my for my study looked at what are the factors that influence major depression among Black women ages 17 to 23 at an HBCU. Some of the theoretical frameworks I used were Black feminist theory, which suggests that women are able to really dismantle patriarchy, because that contributes to subjugation of Black women in society, particularly when it relates to white men being dominant in our society and controlling a lot of the access that we have in all spaces. Also, African psychology, it views the issues of Blacks from a non-European perspective, okay? And the research design was quantitative. There were 78 participants from an HBCU in Atlanta, Georgia, and they were administered the Beck Depression Instrument. And they were asked characteristics about their present behaviors, about their opinions, about their beliefs, about depression. IBR approval was obtained from the university. And this was administered over a 3-day period to a general psychology class. And some of the variables that were pulled from the item looked at self-dislike, self-criticalness, crying, pessimism. Some of the research findings from my study suggested that out of the 20 items listed on the BDI-2, only 8 were significant. Really, I found that the women were not necessarily suffering from depression, but they had a higher inclination to become depressed based on self-criticalness, meaning they were overly critical of themselves, being agitated. They had a loss of interest. They were indecisive. They had a loss of energy, changing appetite, and they did experience tiredness and fatigue. Also, I found that some of the stressors impacting Black college women were related to simple stressors that all college students experience, such as being away from home, making independent decisions, peer acceptance, being in a competitive environment, excessive freedom, just having so many, no boundaries, the perceptions of others, how others are perceiving them, and forming an identity and a healthy self-perception. So these were some of the stressors I identified among our HBCU women. Also, graduation expectations, finding a job, being independent, losing friendships, poor parental relationships. Some of the women in our conversations really discussed their relationships with their moms as not being the healthiest. And so that contributed to a lot of stress. And also just issues around being first generation college students. And so what are some of my recommendations? Obviously, there are things we can do at the individual level, meaning to assess our own trauma inputs and to look at some of the issues that are causing us stress, to look at our family health history to see if there's a history of depression or other significant major mental health issues in our family, and to seek out therapeutic processes. But at the macro level, at the larger level, we can call upon our state departments and mental health agencies to really be inclusive in their efforts to include Black women and people from communities of color, Black men, anyone from a community of color, to really look at those issues that impact our communities, to look at systemic racism and issues that impact our communities, not just now, but how that historic impact still has a impact on our psychological processes and our behaviors today. Mental health counseling should be available at all HBCUs, and there should be more conversation around these issues. Also, as we found in the study or some of the literature, more college freshmen are likelier to seek out a religious source. So what are those entities on our HBCUs, and are those entities available to reach out to our students? Are they helping our students, those faith and religious organizations? Because faith and spirituality is really important to our community. Also, we can, again, look at counseling and early assistance, early intervention programs. And if we see that students are falling behind as faculty members, we can make every effort to perhaps refer them out and follow the appropriate protocols. And that's pretty much are my implications and what we found in our study. So thank you so much for listening. If you have questions, please contact me at my email address at Austin P. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Woods.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So we'll go next to Isaac Berlin Akamanu from Austin Peay University, and his presentation, Perspectives, Attitude, and Awareness toward Sex Education among High School Students in the Volta region in Ghana.
Good morning to you all. Can you all hear me, please? Yes. Okay. I wish to thank the organizers of this conference for allowing some of us to be part of this. It's a privilege and honor for us to present, and I'm grateful for the study. Today I'll be discussing my screen.